Hello and welcome to today's discussion on leveraging insights and analytics to make IT better. My name is Jim Brennan. I serve as the Chief Product Officer here at BetterCloud, and I'm very excited to be joined by a great panel of SaaSOps experts who are doing just that. So with me today is Chris Ayala, VP of IT at Buzzfeed, Chloe Becquet, Associate Director of Technology for HelloFresh, and Robert Levelind, Corporate System Administrator at Tink. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
So to begin, how about we just go around? I would love to hear from each of you a little bit about your company and the role that you play within the company. So why don't we start, Robert, with you?
All right, my name is Robert Levelind. I come from a financial tech company called Tink. So what we do is basically we help to connect banks, we connect to banks and help people move their money to whatever other banks they have with the PSD2 legislation coming in. We're also providing tools for developers to sort of build the next generation of financial services. So you can sort of use our technology to build your next sort of fintech project, which is really cool. So I'm a part of the corporate IT team. What we do is basically we do everything internal IT. We played a part of SaaSOps, we played a part of like hardware repairs, onboarding, offboarding, all of that. We just make sure to take care of our software tool stack the best way we can and automate everywhere and do these very important data-driven decisions to make our internal tool stack become excellent, really.
So I'm guessing you're quite busy these days. That sounds great.
Yes.
Okay, Chloe, how about you?
Hi, so I'm Chloe Becquet. I am the Associate Director of Technology at HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a meal kit company. It's very similar to Blue Apron, Green Chef, and the likes. And we are the biggest meal kit company in the US, but we are headquartered in Berlin. And we are across 14 different regions around the world. So we've been doing really well. What do I do at HelloFresh? So I oversee the technology side for the US. And right now my focus is corporate IT. So just making sure, very similar to Robert, making sure that our SaaS is working, the hardware, the support, and all of that.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Chris?
Hey, Jim, thanks. Yes, I work for Buzzfeed. We're a digital media company. If you've heard of the dress that broke the internet, if you've been trying to learn to cook during the pandemic, we do products like Tasty. We do a lot of news. So we do a little bit of a lot of things. And internally, I head up a few of the divisions of our technology stack. There's corporate support. I handle some of the teams that manage some of our security products, as well as our global networking team as well.
All right, so let's get into our discussion. So we're talking about data and insights. I'm really curious, are there certain pieces of data that you look at every week or maybe even every day to gain some critical insights from? Robert, how about we start with you on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like where we start off is sort of the help desk related data. Whatever tickets are coming in, what are we seeing in trends? Like, are we seeing a pattern? Are people having similar issues? Are we seeing that maybe newly onboarded people have some very specific issues that we haven't seen before, and just trying to relieve those issues based on that information, right? We also do like quite a bit of like information gathering around like, all right, so what applications are people granting access to? Can we see any trends there? Are we seeing certain apps being more authenticated against than previously? Like has people sort of like started to use one singular app more than the other one? And just trying to figure out what's going on in our environment, really. That's really what we're looking at.
And you mentioned trends. So is that, give us a sense, are you looking at trends over a period of weeks or months? What do you find to be most useful in that respect?
Mostly we're looking at months, I would say. Weekly basis tend to skew the data a lot, while monthly kind of keeps the sweet spot. Then you, of course, can do like quarterly, and then you do it on a yearly basis, but then you get like almost a too big data set, at least when it comes to help desk tickets. You get, for us, a lot of data that doesn't necessarily ring true. to what we're searching for, which is sort of like these smaller trends that we can actually take effective actions on, I would say.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, Chris, how about you? Any particular sets of data that have become quite important from a trending standpoint?
We're very similar in that we look at our help desk metrics, particularly in that 90-day sweet spot. And we look at aging as an indicator of how great of a service we're providing to our employees. In terms of some of the other teams, we look at metrics for our throughput for our IT engineering teams and for our networking teams. A lot of the data that we look at revolves around failed authentications around our, not to get into nitty gritty around like our radius and our 802.1x logs, and really at what our failed authorizations look like on the wire, and how many authorizations are coming from our trusted endpoints and what's not trusted. That gives us a lot of data as to maybe why people aren't using our corporate assigned hardware, or what they're doing with our services and what devices they're logging in from. So that's how we gather a lot of our insights and take decisions on an IT level.
So it's interesting, you mentioned it sounded like sort of two broad categories, if you will. One was how you as an IT department are performing almost, right? And are you delivering on SLAs, but then also more in terms of how the business is functioning and how your business is working. So two distinct categories. Is that a fair way to summarize that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we should always have some self-awareness as to how we're performing for our employees, how they're viewing our service, but also with an eye, with the value that we're returning for the dollars that we're spending on our products and services.
Absolutely. That's great. Okay. Let's hone in a bit on that one category of using data to better assess perhaps how the business is working, or how the business is operating and maybe improving operational efficiency or the like. Chloe, could you tell us a bit, maybe an example of how you've leveraged data for that purpose to understand and make change at the business to either drive efficiency or other improvements?
So to resonate, the previous question and looking at trends at the help desk and identifying, I look on a shorter basis because that helps me prioritize where I can direct my resources, but also like the onboarding and offboarding, seeing, okay, how many are coming in, but also how long is it taking us to actually do them, and what are the, like, once it's done, is there actual issues? Like, are we missing, steps? Is there ways of improving those processes? So to answer that question specifically, looking at on and offboarding, obviously, if you're scaling quickly, we need to bring automation in. So this, example, bringing BetterCloud in, because I know it's going to take me an average 45 minutes to create a new user, getting them all set up in all the different platforms. So I'm trying to reduce that, from 45 to 5-10 minutes, and it's completely automated. Allows me to then focus on the education and making sure that the actual face-to-face onboarding experience for the end user, their first day, the first interaction they have with the company is IT. Making sure that they can get into the systems, and focusing on that, focusing on the education and the actual experience.
Yeah, and I love that point, because essentially you're saying that you're using this type of data or these insights to drive process improvements, ultimately to benefit your end users, right? To give them that better onboarding experience. And that's really what we're all in the business of doing, is to help people work better, right? Exactly. And so you're able to use some insights to make that happen. That's excellent. Okay, Robert, how about you? Any things come to mind as far as real change that you were able to impact on the business because of some of this data?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to just add on to that, like, of course, just looking at this data and improving the onboarding and offboarding experience, I think that is one of the first things you look at as a corporate IT department, because that is one of the most tedious tasks you can do. And it's also one of those tasks that you absolutely feel like if this is not solid, like you are going to end up in a very sticky situation quite quickly, right? Either the first interaction with your new customers, so to speak, becomes quite rough, and they don't really understand how do I get access to X, Y, and Z. Or if we're talking the offboarding experience, is having these lingering accounts laying around. And I mean, that is a security issue that it should be taken very seriously. So even if you are not like using BetterCloud or any other automation tool, I mean, you will probably start looking into like, how can we at least make this a better experience quite quickly? Because it's something that you will do so much within corporate IT. But I mean, if we look at other things we have been looking at and how we leverage data, it's mostly about looking at how people are using apps and actually also finding or even starting to challenge some of the apps that we have seen internally and these duplicate apps. And what I found quite interesting is that we went in with the expectation that we were basically going to remove an app that we found very similar, let's say like Trello to Jira. But we found out, like, just looking at the data, looking how it's actually being used, and also talking to our customers, which is the employees of Tink, finding out that, hey, we're actually using this application and we have a legit user case for it. And that was quite interesting that, you know, like you go in with like one mindset, but taking that data and just letting the data speak for itself actually made a huge difference in how we approach the application, I would say.
Yeah, that's a fascinating, that's something I'm hearing a lot more of. I had another IT leader recently make the statement to me that there's no such thing as shadow IT, which sounds pretty, kind of controversial, but what they were really saying was, to your point, IT is whatever your employees need it to be. And if they need to go get some additional applications to get their job done, then that's what IT is. And how do we, as IT leaders, move to this more perhaps progressive mindset of not standing in the way of that, but actually enabling it and facilitating it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can be tool agnostic, right? But you need to, like, it's the license overspending that sort of becomes the the hard part, right? Like,
yeah. And this topic of visibility is one that we've been talking a lot about today. In fact, during Altitude, this challenge of understanding what applications are in use by whom, as you mentioned, redundant applications, maybe licenses that aren't being used. So would love to hear from others as far as what that challenge looks like for you, and perhaps some of the ways that you've been able to overcome that challenge, or at least deal with it to some extent. So Chris, we'd love to hear from you on that subject.
Sure. I mean, duplication of services is definitely something that we're keenly aware of. For us, we use our identity providers as much as possible. So whatever app is out there, it tends to sit behind our identity providers, and we look at usage patterns so we can see as people are flowing from new teams using Trello to maturing to using Jira to some other tool that's on the market. And what we try to do is really try to bring value by showing people what they're using at any given time. So we'll sit down with people in the business and say, hey, we noticed you've got A and B. Are you really leveraging A, or is it more of a legacy system? And we'll actually dedicate our own technicians and our own engineers to help them with the lift of moving from one system to another. What we find is that usually teams are living between two systems and don't really have the time or the resources to move from one to another. And one of the ways in which IT makes themselves valuable is by making sure that they are bridging that gap for teams that might not necessarily always have the engineering resources to make it happen. But definitely consolidation of resources, of services, is one of the areas in which we focus a lot of our time. Probably every quarter we'll go through audits, and there's services that we look at. I mean, Buzzfeed, even though we're a digital first company, we've been around for quite some time. At some point, even had phones on their desk, which seems like a really antiquated thing. But when we look at the data on our services, we're spending huge amounts of money on these copper lines that nobody used. And one of the things that we were able to do was work with our productivity vendor, which is G Suite, and move everybody to phones. And the revenue that we were able to recoup, or money that we were able to recoup by not spending on this old technology, just by looking at our usage patterns and knowing where we contract services that really were just there because of legacy was really great and the benefits of the company.
Excellent example, and I think you mentioned that your IDP is the main source of visibility. Is that how you're primarily learning about who's using what applications?
Yeah, we marry our IDP and BetterCloud, and what we don't get from our IDP, we use BetterCloud to really leverage insights into. So with the data that we get from BetterCloud on usage and around licensing, we're able to better make decisions rather than relying on just our identity providers. There are some vendors out there that still don't have great identity integration, and that's where BetterCloud really fills the gap.
Chloe, when you think about some of the biggest challenges in terms of visibility, what comes to mind for you?
Spending. I mean, I know you've mentioned shadow. There's no such thing as shadow IT. I will use that and convert it to legacy IT, essentially, and identifying them. I transitioned. So I was at one job before the pandemic and at another job during the pandemic. So I got to see firsthand. So I've come into a new company without. I did not have this existing relationship with the end users, with the different departments. Obviously, HelloFresh is quite large. So not having that face-to-face, just finding the people. But I just went straight to finance to get that spend because they see the spending, but they might not necessarily understand what it's used. They're just paying it, making sure that, we still actually running remotely. But just working very closely with finance, identifying them, and then from there, identifying all the stakeholders and being able to have that conversation. So like talking to finance, getting visibility into all the applications that we're using, how it's being used, and just reaching out to people and just saying, this is what I see. Okay, it's not a secret. I have this kind of visibility, but I'm missing the extra bits to make that full, well-rounded diagnosis, and just have that conversation, and make other departments as well understand that we need to communicate more. We need to have better visibility across the board.
Yeah, so start with where the money's being spent. That's always a good starting point, right? And then layer onto that some good old-fashioned communication, maybe interviews or ad hoc surveys, that type of thing. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Robert, you and I were talking earlier. You've come up with some innovative approaches in this area. Would love to have you walk us through some of this.
Or as I would like to put it, like I rather steal ideas and just modify it to my own. So so ThoughtWorks have this great tool which is called the sort of like Tech Radar. It's initially built for engineering teams to sort of outline what technologies they will be using internally. I had this like super quick idea, like what if we just take that and just try to translate that into a sort of like SaaS tool radar. So I started building that, and the idea is really just to give our end users sort of like a map of where we feel apps reside, whether it's something that we will invest in, if it's something that we will just support, or if it's something we're trying to get away from. So it's just opinions in many ways. It's not really the truth, because I don't think you can sort of be that strict about applications without having to working with them all the time, right? But the idea is really just to portray somehow a map of our feelings and where we see apps going, if it's something that we will put in more effort into, or if it's something that we'll just try to get away from to consolidate with other applications. So so far it's been kind of great, and we try to just evolve it every single time. We had some bad ideas at the start and just trying to evolve on it or iterate by each version of it. So it's we'll see what happens with it.
Yeah, no, I love it. And you talked about the feelings, but it's that same sentiment that we talked about earlier about understanding what your employees find valuable and then actually using that as a source of data. It's critical. It's critical. Excellent. So, it's come up a couple times during our discussion about the pandemic and the effects of that. It's been different for every organization. I would love to hear from each of you when you think back over these past 7 months, what's been the most important finding? And maybe that's come from data, maybe it's just some other learning that you as an organization have had, but what's been the most interesting learning or finding about your business, about the way in which your business works, the way in which your employees work? I would love to hear that from each of you. Chris, why don't we start with you?
Sure. There were definitely a few surprises. I think one was finding how digitally native our IT infrastructure already was because of the work we've done over the last 3 or 4 years, and ensuring we were preparing our employees to be really to work from anywhere already. And this shift from moving out of the offices and into wherever they were had already happened for us. I think the more so, what surprised me the most was how well our IT teams were able to accelerate changes that on our roadmaps we thought were going to be painful and going to take them 18, 24 months, and we were able to compress them into a matter of 3 or 4 months. During the pandemic, we eliminated old world telecom, changed AV vendors globally, eliminated services that had been used because they were legacy and really a stalwart of our physical footprints. And those kind of disappeared really quickly once you couldn't go into those offices anymore and didn't have people clinging to those old ideas of how they should be working. And then lastly, I think how quickly our platforms internally in IT received the self-care that we've been delaying for months and years to achieve things like true automated accounts and provisioning, and not just for full-time employees, but for the entire workforce beyond as well. Moving to a full remote supply chain to push real self-service for employees of how they consume IT, and moving to real zero-touch onboarding for all of our core devices. If we hadn't been able to move quickly, it would have been hard to get away from taking a few hours for every new hire. At this point, we can ship new employees equipment, and really our touch points are more of a relationship building exercise on day one, making sure that they can come to us for any needs they have, and it's less, oh, well, where's my password and how do I get into this thing? A lot of that has been automated and provisioned away.
Chloe, how about at HelloFresh? What's been the one finding that?
So HelloFresh, so I'm in New York, so we've been in lockdown officially since April, but I've been in lockdown since March, so a long time. Resonating with Chris here, I had already worked on transitioning everyone to laptops, and our entire infrastructure, IT infrastructure, was in the cloud already. So that was smooth. Like I guess I'm impressed that we were already working towards that. And obviously I was not hoping for a pandemic to prove our point. But it really, it did, okay, yes, I did a good job without realizing, how it would turn out in there. But the other side is users much more independent. For some reason, it's a small trend that I see usually in office. People tend to forget about the little things. Whereas if they were on their own, left to their own devices, they would find that answer themselves. So finding that they're much more self-reliant. One funny thing, users are still trying to get companies to outfit their home office. They are asking for desks, chairs, and all the like. So obviously that depends on the business and how they want to process with that. But it's funny how when you get a desk request coming through the ticket system, like, hey, I need a desk. I'm like, it's like, I don't know what to tell you there. But the other thing, and I think that one obviously is important to me, seeing how productivity overall, we were all expecting, okay, we're going to be so much less productive because we're distracted, we've got kids, we've got pets, we've got family, we're working face to face, especially for parents, homeschooling and all that. But overall, the performance productivity has increased across the board. Having all of those remote tools, it really allowed us to, well, less commute time. That means you can roll out of bed straight to your desk. So you're saving yourself that hour and a half to come in. But the downside of that is you are spending more time working, which I find myself. So it really showed me my own work schedule, and it forced me to become more self-aware and actually take care of my work-life balance and actively seek to improve my mental well-being, because I just work. When I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone. Sometimes I forget to take a break. I'm sure we're all guilty of that. But this really was like, okay, I am sitting in the same desk for like 8 hours, sometimes more. I'm forgetting because I'm just so into it and just smashing through all my daily tasks that I was noticing that, okay, I need to take a step back. I am at home. I can definitely walk around. I can actually take a break, make myself lunch, spend some time with my dog, and then come back to the task. And it's very self-reflective.
Yeah, I think I think we've all followed a similar curve, where in the early days it was do everything we can to maximize productivity, probably to the extent of over-rotating a little bit like you're talking about. And then we've all hopefully course corrected a little bit and found a bit more of a balance. Definitely. Well, good. All right. So I think just to wrap things up here, for those folks listening today that maybe are not yet to this point where they're able to truly leverage data and insights to drive change in their business in the way in which all of you have, what advice would you give them? How can they get started in this area? And Robert, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I mean, I think we all mentioned it at some point during this talk here. But I mean, your IDP solution will be a great way to start. Your help desk will be a great way to start as well. I mean, if you're on G Suite, for instance, the dashboards with most of the data or sort of like answers to the questions you kind of have will be already built for you, depending on which sort of like pricing tier you are. But I mean, it's a great tool. They have great dashboards to just visualize how are people sharing data, how are people logging in, is there any trends to see, like which meeting rooms are the most popular, like how are people meeting with each other. That is also a thing that is just pre-built into G Suite as an IDP, for instance. But one thing or one key takeaway that I want everyone to think about as well is that you should be trying to figure out like, what is the question? What are we looking for? Because if you're just hoarding a lot of data and just trying to visualize something, you're probably not going to get any results at all. But rather start with a question, like what are we looking for? What do we want to visualize? And also don't be biased around this data. Try not to use it for evil. Try not to point fingers with it, but rather take in the company as a whole, trying to figure out patterns overall and not trying to blame any certain department or any person for doing something. It's not about that. It's just improving on what you already have. I would say that is the best way I can describe working with data.
Excellent. Chris, any advice from you?
Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of that. I think for me, there's definitely something to say about knowing what you have. Inventory your service catalog, identify what data you do have and have access to. There's a lot of applications out there that people sign up for without telling IT. Try to build partnerships to figure out what those are. And once you do, use your identity providers and your productivity tools and all of your endpoint remote access tools. They all have a treasure trove of data. And once you have that, exploring what the problems are out in the, or where the opportunities lay in the company that are low-hanging fruit to solve by IT. I think during COVID, it's great to know things about employee quality of life, right? How are people working? Are they having too many meetings? What trends are you seeing at your help desk that indicate the kinds of problems people are having at home? Have the East Coast employees extended their day from 9 a.m. to like 9 p.m.? Are you seeing tickets at all hours of the day? And then partner with HR to like let people know, hey, our people are working hours that are unusually much longer than they used to be. And look at your metrics over similar time periods, right? Quarter over quarter, year over year. Although at this point, because of the pandemic, year-over-year metrics kind of mean nothing. But there are still those 90-day sweet spots that you can look at over the last half year to 3/4 of a year. And yeah, I think that's one of the things that will take IT past the traditional replacing AV dongles and printers into a much more clear future of becoming partners with a lot of the other business functions.
Thanks, you get the last word for the day.
I'm echoing, both Robert and Chris here. Find the low-hanging fruit, and to add on, like looking at the IT help desk as an example, like using tags. The differentiating the different ticket types and counts really helps you provide that insight on where to focus your resources. Especially if you have a small team in IT, you want to know, what do you need to focus on? Do you need to focus on processes? Do you need to provide better self-help, documentation, education, rollout automation, or even just get that headcount, that you desperately need, even though, in the remote world, just start digging, start scratching the surface, like low-hanging fruit, and you'll be surprised, bringing order to the chaos, and then you can just go down your list.
Excellent. Well, so with that, we are going to conclude today's discussion. I want to first off thank once again our amazing panelists for spending their time with us and sharing these great insights into this really important topic. And also want to thank our audience for joining us. We hope that you're enjoying day 2 of Altitude. And we invite you, of course, to stay with us for our next session. And we also hope to see you in tomorrow's product keynote. And thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.